we've been having our like weekly mentoring sessions. Then I really wanted to have you on because just from a leadership standpoint, I think if we were open enough to share that conversation, there'd be so much benefit to people listening. So, not that I want you to mentor me on the podcast, but
I didn't say this, but we're live.
We're live. Number 31, Patrick Palmer, Cody Steinman, Ryan McCracken. You know, it's hard to say when people go, should I prepare for the podcast? What kind of questions are you going to ask? It's hard to explain that we're just going to have an organic conversation. So on the way here, I was thinking about it, and probably the best way to describe the dialogue we have on the show, and Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not an interview. An interview would be where I'd prepare questions, you'd prepare answers, and then we would hash it out, right? It's not a discussion. So like we don't have a topic today, right? It's not like we're going to talk about a specific thing and we're going to discuss it back and forth. It's just an organic conversation.
Love it. As you can imagine, over the course of my career, most of what I've done has been pretty organic Q&A, right? So you get up on the firing squad's in front of you, and you get up front and you take sometimes just really fun, lighthearted questions and kind of where we're going, vision oriented, culture oriented, and then other times it's, man, things are tough, and what are we doing, and how are you going to fix this, and this is broken or that's broken, and so you get somewhat used, I think, to just rolling with whatever topic comes up.
Well, and a lot of the guests that are in a big leadership role or CEO role or owner of a business, they want to prepare for the podcast because they prepare for everything. They prepare for their meetings. And so it's really hard when they say, okay, what do I need to do to prepare? I say, please don't prepare, right? It's hard. I think that some of them struggle with that.
Yeah, well, most of us are taught from a leadership perspective that the best way to be successful is through preparation, right? So you get in this habit of continually preparing, whether you're preparing for the market, you hear the term, you skate to where the puck is going, not where the puck is. So you're constantly preparing, and you get in that groove. And then when somebody says, let me throw this curveball at you, don't prepare. Just come in and let's go kind of ad hoc and wing it. There's some anxiety that comes along with that because you're so used to being prepared. Great athletes like Russell Wilson, right? You hear him all the time. He's like, there's nothing to be afraid of. I've broken down so much film. I've prepared to the degree that I'm going to go out on the field and it's almost going to be automatic. Take that away and you're kind of, disrobing to a certain degree.
Do you think that's good though to do once in a while, is to step into something that you're not confident at?
I think in situations like this, where you have an opportunity to be a little more raw and vulnerable and just allow things to come out, I think it is. I think when other people are dependent upon you to execute and to do well, then that's probably not a situation where I would allow myself to be unprepared and maybe more raw, right? So I think in certain scenarios it is. And for me, this is really fun because I like just seeing where the conversation goes. And, I'll walk away from this learning something either about myself or about you guys or about the world in general.
Well, and talk about anxiety to have your boss on your podcast. I was thinking about it on the way here, and Ryan and I we don't typically talk a lot about the guests before they come on because we don't want to fall into that preparation mode. But we've gotten to know each other from a leadership standpoint, mentorship standpoint, mentor-mentee relationship in a short amount of time. But what I'm excited about is because we've put all of our energy into that at work, that get to know the Patrick that not everybody gets the opportunity to know on a day-to-day working alongside them basis. So the one thing I did prepare for, I was on your LinkedIn page after reading your blog, which I want to hear about what motivated you to start that blog on LinkedIn. But you went back to school and got your MBA in 2010-11, is that right?
Correct.
So talk about that. Was that a good move? What motivated you to do that? And
this came later in your career,
right,
after owning companies, and most people would never go back to college at that point.
So truth be told, when I was younger, I was the first kid from either side of the family. So what would be known as a first-generation student as an undergrad. And when I went to undergrad, I made a promise to my grandfather, who's since passed away, that I would go back someday and go one step further and get my master's degree. I didn't know what it was going to be in. The
So
practical.
your grandfather wanted you to go back and get your master's degree.
I think he would have been okay either way. It was just something that I promised him. When you see someone who doesn't make it past the 10th grade, he was in the Depression era, had 5 brothers and sisters, had 6 kids of his own. You get out and you get working, and same with my dad, right? So I come from a really blue collar background, and it was just something for me. I felt like they did everything they could to get me in a position to be a first generation college student. So I'll do my best to take it one step further.
Like make him proud.
Yeah. It was, to me, it was almost like I felt the need to give back to my family for some reason. You know, and they were family business owners, small business owners. They were in the business of, floor covering. So carpet, linoleum, formica, tile, that kind of stuff. And so very, very hard work, get up every day and grind, for your family. And so for me, I just felt like they put me in this position, and I'm going to try to take advantage of every single opportunity along the way. When that opportunity came about, when I actually had a little bit of free time, the company was fairly mature at that time, and there wasn't so much fuel being put into the company. I had an opportunity to do it, and I said, this is my time. If I'm going to do it, fulfill that promise. There was also some other components. The company was growing at a rate where I felt like I really needed to have some refined finance skills, accounting skills, some things you can learn on the street, but I wanted to have the textbook version of it as well. And I thought it might round me out as not so much as a leader, but more as an operator.
Well, and I can tell you that there's been a couple times where you said in business school they teach this to me, and that's been good to have from a leadership standpoint too. Yeah,
because the textbook version, or the quote unquote modeling, or the things that you go through in traditional business school classes, sometimes they're really good to keep in the back of your head, but the reality is it doesn't work out live very well that way. Like, you can't take a model that you have on a spreadsheet and have it be static, right? It's the same concept of having a pro forma. It never works out to the T, but it's good to have a process to follow in everything that you do. And so sometimes I've had the habit in the past of just going off the gut, like gut instinct, or my past tells me it'll tilt this way or that way in making decisions. And I think the one thing that happened in going to business school was now I had a process that other people use to operate companies, which for me I use just as a gauge to say, okay, is my gut telling me the right thing? Now I have an entire set of data behind me to back the decision that I'm making. So from that standpoint, it was hugely beneficial.
So you added the science component of it.
Yeah, for sure. And also knowing how to get at the analytics and practicing things I wasn't good at. I mean, I wasn't a super gifted technical writer. You go to business school and they're going to just light that paper up with red ink if you don't do it right. So the discipline of taking the time to use proper syntax, grammar, punctuation, all those things is a very good lesson in how to be disciplined for all the right reasons.
Yeah. Trying to remember who I was talking to recently that said the same thing, that just the grammar that you learn from going through higher education, how that can separate yourself on a subconscious basis from other people that are in a similar field. So if you're interviewing for a job or you're around CEOs or people in leadership, they'll recognize that you're educated just by the way you speak, even if it's subconscious on their level, on their part. So.
Well, and I never would have thought, I mean, when we started talking about the blog stuff, I never would have thought that I would have been writing content.
And and you can tell those are well written from an English standpoint. They're well written, easy to read blogs.
To this day, unlike the mathematic component or equivalent, I probably have to, everything that I write, even if it's an email or anything, I'll have to reread it 3 or 4 times just to catch it right. I'm just that some things we're naturally gifted at and they come very easy. For me, that's more of the math, finance, accounting side. But when it comes to writing, I have to really buckle down because it's not my strength. And probably why I haven't spent more time doing it in the past.
But it's hard.
It's hard, yeah. It doesn't come natural to me, so there's a little bit of fighting it. But what I am finding is that I find a lot of joy in it because there's all of this stuff that I have tucked away over the last 24 years. And it's my way of just giving back.
Do you think that we're going through a change in business now where there's more giving, there's more sharing of ideas? Like the fact that you are going to take your leadership ideas and share those with, it could be anybody. You could have your competitors viewing it. You could have anybody viewing these blogs. Do you think that that's a trend that we're starting to see in business?
It's interesting. I think it's all about who you follow, right? It's about the people that you follow on social media, the people that you read, the 5 people you surround yourself with. And so I think there are a lot of people right now focused on things like mindfulness and meditation and gratitude and operating from that space. And I think there's a lot of people who don't necessarily practice, or maybe they're not as visible, but it comes from that place. I think there's also just a natural maturity level. As you get older, you start to see things for, wow, when I was in this position, I had this coach to help me, and I don't know if I would have made the same decisions. And when I, later in life, I had this mentor, and if that person didn't pour into me, and so it becomes this give back type scenario more than, hey, I want to operate from a space of positivity. Even though I do, it's more about, I've been doing journaling for a long time, right? And the more and more I journal, the more bits of my past come up in terms of, wow, in 07 and 08, we had this horrible market crash, and what were the things that got me through? We're not going through that right now in our industry, but we're seeing significant change, right? From fintech to digital mortgage applications to all this tech that's coming in, and we're kind of a late arrival to the party from the tech side. Mm-hmm. And so I look back at that time only as a measurement of, how did I operate in anxious moments? How did I operate in terms of the people that were mentors to me, the people that were leaders to me, the coaching concepts that I learned back then? And they're really the things that kind of helped me get through each day, no matter how difficult it was. So, look, I think if that's the one thing that happens, is I get to give back a little bit and meet people and just say, hey, if this makes your journey, the learning curve of your journey shorter, I sleep a lot better at night.
Well, I like your blog. I like it too because I can access a little bit of leadership information without having to take up your time or have to get on the phone with you. I can just read things that I've implemented, and I talk to other people that have implemented, especially when it comes around to running a meeting, whether it be a one-on-one or a group meeting that people have taken from that blog. Have you been reading his blog?
Yeah.
Ryan?
Yep.
And has it helped your leadership skills?
Yeah. I helped guide you in some decisions recently, so I'd say yes.
One thing I think you and I talked about this the other day, but it's like the martial arts, the belts. One of the reasons I asked you about confidence a few minutes ago was because I've kind of gone through a area of a lack of confidence and a feeling very vulnerable and not comfortable, not having a lot of confidence. And, when you go from being like the best brown belt there is, and then all of a sudden now you're a purple belt and you're the worst purple belt, right? That there's that that confidence, that your confidence can get rocked, where you start to question your ability, right? So talk about that a little bit, and maybe have you felt like that before, and how do you get through that? How do you change that mindset to where it's okay to start to doubt yourself?
Yeah, and it's a really fascinating topic because every single one of us goes through it. I mean, that's the first thing I try to remember is that whether it's in business or parenting or, marriage relationships or anything, right? There's a negative thought at some point that goes through our mind. And I think the difference is some people really make the choice to practice how to manage the negative thought. And so whether that is things like journaling that we talked about, meditation or mindfulness, where you can actually stop your mind in the process when it's having a negative thought, potentially change it to a positive thought. I posted a little clip today because I was just thinking, I was talking to somebody that was telling me, I really think we're on the verge of a market crash. And I was shocked and taken back by it because I was just having a different conversation with somebody that told me, I can't believe how much opportunity there is. There's so much opportunity in this market. Like I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning or 4:30 or whatever this person said. It was super, super early, because I can't believe how much opportunity is out there. If you just learn these 3 new things. And so that to me is the complete difference. One person thinks there's going to be a crash because in their mind, this negative thought came in, they get gripped with fear and it starts to perpetuate itself. Mm-hmm. And so I've dealt with that all my career, whether it's in the form of anxiety or fear, or am I making the right decision? I don't know a single human being who doesn't have some level of self-doubt. It's our brain's natural mechanism to protect us, right? Natural fight or flight is like, look, this guy's chasing me. I've got to get out of here. Like that's smart. but I think there are some tools that you can use to get through it. I mean, for me, it's all about repetition. It's no different than in sports, right? And the more you ride your bike, the more fit you get, the more confident you can be at the end of a race that you can expend that energy. But if you don't put in the work and you don't have the repetitions, maybe it's football, maybe it's work.
Do you think that brings up a great point? Because I've always liked doing hobbies or things outside of work that kind of require a similar skill set or mindset to what was required in my daily job. So do you kind of feel the same way? Like I know you're really big into road biking, right? You and Ryan both. And I mean, how long have you been doing that?
Well, it was eight or 9 years, I think, in terms of pure racing.
2010,
right,
I think.
Right.
So,
Let's take that example, right? So here's the thing about bike racing. It's extremely painful. Maybe you can't see it if you're watching it on TV, but it is one of the most painful things you can do in terms of the affliction on the body and the thoughts that go through your mind. When you're completely oxygen deprived, there's nothing worse than knowing you have to expend that much more energy because you just feel like you don't have it. And your brain actually is trying to shut your body down once your heart rate gets to a certain rate, right? It's just not shut it down, but you start to build up lactic acid and all sorts of other phenomena that just don't feel very good. And so I actually learned from somebody that you guys know very well, Aaron Coker. He's like, at the end of the race, the only thing I say to myself is 10 more seconds. Just 10 more seconds. Just 10 more seconds. And when that's up, and in business, I sometimes take that same mindset, right? If it's really, really tough and it's going to be a really difficult day and I got a lot of stuff that I got to get through, I say to myself, I just need to make it through the first 3 hours. And if I can make it through lunch, then I just need to make it through the next 3 hours. And if you listen to some of the stuff the Navy SEALs talk about when they go through BUDS, a lot of that's how they manage that pain, is not thinking, I got to survive 7 days or 10 days or whatever it is they go through that's crazy, but they say, man, I just need to make it to lunch because I know I'm going to get a meal. And if I can make it to lunch, then I just need to make it to dinner. Like they had these chow time periods.
Just chunk it up.
Just chunk it down.
And that bell is always there. So they always have at a moment's notice they can be done, right? We're all Jocko fans here, right?
Yeah.
And when Jocko first kind of hit the public speaking and podcast scene, my office was on the first floor, and I parked my truck right by the window. And so I always looked at my pickup truck as my bell, right? At any time I can get in my pickup truck and leave work and not have to deal with whatever I'm dealing with. I can go screw off and not prospect and not do all the things I'm supposed to do. So it almost was like my Navy SEALs bell, and I wasn't going to ring it until 5 o'clock. I wasn't going to get in my truck and leave.
It's an interesting thing because what I've learned, whether it's in bike racing or in business or anything else I've really studied, is you're about as good as your team. Like, to me, confidence comes from having a really strong team. And when I was bike racing, either it was Ryan and I together or a lot of folks, but the one reason you don't ring the bell is because you don't want to let down the guy next to you. You got to tow the next guy to the line. It's a team effort, right? In business, that extra hour is the difference between, people having jobs, the company remaining viable and profitable. And if you have a really good team around you, they're going to do the same thing. So if you're having an off day, sometimes that confidence comes from knowing I got a really good team, and I may not hit the mark every single day. That's not possible for any of us. We're not perfect, but knowing that you got a really strong team and people who are really, really good at their jobs, it doesn't matter what function of life, that connectedness to me, that community, is also one of those things that instills great confidence.
Well, and you and I talked a little bit about how a good leader can go to sleep at night knowing that they let somebody down or didn't live up to someone's expectation that day. And I thought about that a lot after you and I had that conversation. And did your ability to improve in that area, did a lot of that come from going through the crash and having being in the industry that had one of the hardest recessions or the one that was hit the hardest out of any other industry during the recession?
I think I learned a lot of lessons during that time, but I mean, that particular lesson came at a moment or a season when it was very fruitful. So fast forward to 2012 when pipelines are just super full and you're actually having a different struggle, which is we don't have enough underwriters or doctorars or funders, and the turn times are really strung out and deals aren't getting done that quickly. And so you have a different, people they've gone out, they've solicited the business, they brought in the business, they want to transact, but you don't have the capacity to transact. And in that, it was actually Daniel Harkavy that I was talking to at that time, because his company, Building Champions, had grown so much. I was like, Daniel, how do you deal with all these, the people that want access to you, that want your time, and you just know there's not enough hours in the day to get to them. And that's where I learned that concept was, I'm going to do everything I can, and by the end of the day, I'm going to put my stamp on the day, but I have to realize that when I go to bed that night, there's no way I can make every single person happy. And if I could just get to understand that as long as I did everything I could that day, and I could put my stamp on it and turn off the light, I could be okay with that.
What was it like before you got to that point?
I would spend a lot of nights with insomnia, frankly. I mean, I've had a lot of nights over the years where I feel like I let somebody down, or I didn't make the right decision, or I didn't make the right call on personnel, or I affected their business in some indirect way, right? I mean, when you work with a large sales force, the decisions that you make globally or corporately, they can affect how much business other people can do in your teams, affect operations people, affect people's compensation. And so you carry that with you. And some of that's just practice. You have to be okay, again, knowing that you show up, prepare, make the very best decision that you can at that time with the information you have, and then you have to learn how to let it go. And that to me is where much later in life, I would say like the last year and a half, 2 years, I've really tried to focus on this whole concept of mindfulness and meditation, and having a little bit better control, not necessarily of my thoughts, but just pausing for a moment and learning how to breathe and be in the present. It's really easy to get spun up when you're making a decision if all you're worried about is the future aftermath. And so I try to not live in that place anymore. It's difficult, but that's what I try to do.
So when you're getting spun up, is that, do you find that when you're getting spun up, is that when you lose control of your mindset and then those negative thoughts or negative self-talking coming? Are you all right over there, Ryan?
And make sure he's okay.
Yeah. I think you just wanted some potato chips. Or let me change it for a second. So the other day I sent you a Hatebreed song. I know you're not a heavy metal guy, but did you listen to it?
I did.
You did?
Yeah.
And were you able to understand the lyrics?
No.
No? When Ryan gets back, we're going to have him pull up the lyrics. It's off their new album, and I love this song because it's all about that negative self-talk. And there's a line in there that says I'm going to butcher it, but Ryan will pull it up. It's called Shut It Off. If you just Google Hatebreed, Shut It Off lyrics. I think it's Shut It Off. They talk about how these negative voices in your head, especially I think when you get spun up like you're talking about, can take something
Shut me out.
That's meaningless seems significant.
Mm.
And I thought about that a lot because, being new at the company and stuff, I've done that. I can tell right away where I've had negative talk in my head and I get all spun up about something. And then at the end of the day, it was really, I gave meaning to something that was insignificant.
Do you want me to pull this up on the screen capture? Do you want me to play it? What do you want me to do here?
No, don't play it. I don't want to. Apparently, you can't understand.
He doesn't
the
want to
lyrics
bang
anyways.
his head.
This isn't it.
Oh, well, that's no good then.
I did enjoy the reemergence of the rock and roll scene that I didn't know existed anymore. I'd been listening to 70s, 80s, and 90s rock, and we went to dinner the other night, and a bunch of friends, and they just started throwing out all these rock bands that I was like, I didn't even know rock and roll in that form existed anymore. So now,
Have you followed up?
Yeah,
have you listened to any
absolutely. I'm blowing Spotify up with some really great rock and roll music.
It's on that album, but I almost wore my Sword T-shirt.
I couldn't believe how much you guys knew about it. I was like, wow, there must be a scene out there that I'm just oblivious to. Now, keep in mind, I have a 14-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old daughter, so much of my day, if it's in music in the car, is I'm spent listening to
Did you go through the
Drake.
Kids Bop phase?
Yeah, all of it. all of the, from 2 years old when you just start listening to Disney and Little Einsteins. You know that song, Little Einsteins?
Oh, yeah.
Oh man, that thing gets stuck in your head.
Don't even get me started.
Don't get going. And then you phase through to now where it's like, wow, I'm just listening to pop and rap all the time.
Open up Spotify and type in Hatebreed.
All right.
I don't know if our computer can handle it. Yeah, I used to prospect. Ryan will remember there was a few times I used to prospect. So
Oh gosh.
I created a prospecting station, not a state, a cockpit in my office. So I had a separate desk that I put on boxes so I could stand up, and I'd blast music on Spotify. And what's nice about Spotify on the phone is I would call, the music would shut off, and then as soon as the call was over, it would come back on right where I left off. And I was just going through like a sentimental time with my 6-year-old, and she was listening to a lot of Kids Bop, and so I'm like, fuck it, I'm just going to put Kids Bop on. And I prospected for 2 hours with Kids Bop. It was one of the best prospecting sessions I've had.
But prior to the Kids Bop, we shared a wall, and he would just play this heavy metal, and he would just be over there like typing an email or something, just listening to like the hardest music ever, and it's coming through my wall, and I'm thinking,
Listen to Foreclosure of a Dream by Megadeth because it talked about foreclosures.
That sounds like music I might listen to if I'm on the bike trainer. I really need to sweat and just get my heart rate up. Just something that will force you to move.
he said it calms him down, and I'm like, this is stressing me out.
Let me see my phone. I'll look it up.
Yeah, it was crazy.
But yeah, it's that self-talk, you know. So I guess my original question was getting spun up about things that aren't that important, and you've done a good job at recognizing that, with me, anyways. And I told you before we started, I don't want to make this about our mentor relationship.
No, but I think it is important for viewers or listeners to understand that the first question you got to ask is this even real? I've spent enough hours in my life like ruminating over something that could or might be wrong that somebody else is thinking because I haven't heard back from them, only to find out that there's no truth to it whatsoever, right?
Yes. Well, just like, you have a client, they didn't call you back, and you're like, oh, they definitely didn't like me. They definitely have chosen my competitor. And it just turns out they were just busy that day, and they're just going to get back to you when the time presented itself, and you just cooked up something in your head that's so not true. Question one, is it even real? Is what I'm saying to myself in this moment, is it real? And if it is, what are the facts to back it? And I have really tried to practice getting into that mode of something comes into my mind, and if I can't verify that it's true, then it's time to reach out and ask somebody, hey, can you just verify for me that, we're still on for 4 o'clock? It's now 4:30 and you're not here yet. And they're like, I left my cell phone at home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm stuck in traffic and I don't text when I'm driving. Like smart things. And you're like, oh, that makes total sense. I'm glad I didn't send you a really mean text and say,
well, screw
forget
you.
about it. I've said it for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But we all do that, right?
And we're all real. We're all human.
Yeah, raw.
It's okay to see somebody that you haven't seen in a while and go, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name. Something's off. Just Google something's off.
Oh, something's off.
Something's off lyrics. We're going to do this. We're going to find these lyrics. All right, so let's talk about self-talk and mindset. And I want you to talk about this if you want to. So how do you prepare for times of scarcity? Like if your business, if you're a startup or whatever. Oh, we turned off our internet. We're going from bad to worse here.
He is getting ugly.
Well, hey, we're gonna face a little adversity right here today, so we're gonna figure out how you get through adversity.
Plug it into the charger. So how do you prepare? Like if you are running a small business and you know that times may get lean, right? So you got to prepare for that, but you need to keep it a mindset of abundance and not scarcity. How do you operate both like that?
So number one is you have to determine where and when you can cut, and then also realize that you can never cut your way to profitability. And I'm talking about expenses, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're just talking about the purely financial constraints of going through a tight market or a downturn in the market or even a crash, what is every single thing that we can get rid of that's not a necessity? Step two for me is typically we're going to do purely fundamentals. Meaning we're going to be really, really good at blocking and tackling.
But don't you think there's a pitfall there that people can fall into where they do the first thing you said, but not the second?
I think all of these are pitfalls because you can get so focused on any one of these categories that you don't execute across the board, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think you always have to have a mind where you take a little bit of time off. Like in the coaching world that I'm from, it's called on time. So on Fridays, I have a 2.5 hour block where I'm uninterrupted, I'm out of the office, and I'm working on the business, not in the business. So I get some distance from it. It's really critical. If you're in moments of high intense pressure, it's really easy to get locked eyes down on your project or your paper or the feeling you're being consumed by. We fail to pick our head up and look around and go, oh, maybe it's not as bad as I think. Or if we focus on these three things, we can see our way through. The third thing that I learned, but I didn't learn it because I was so young and immature and inexperienced in 07 and 08, was that every single moment of downturn will be your greatest moment of opportunity.
Say that again.
Every time this fear comes from these biggest downturns, will almost always become your greatest moment of opportunity. Meaning the market will almost always give itself to you if you have the confidence to go get it. So you look at the companies that came out of 08 or 09 and look at what happened to them just by simply, number one, gutting it out day after day and not quitting and finding a way to make it through. Those were the companies that consolidated, bought other companies, and grew at multiples of 10x plus, right? For the next 5 or 6 years. Many of them sold for hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, all the way down to the individual loan officers that stuck it through.
They scooped up all the market share, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you think about it from Warren Buffett's perspective, it's like when everybody else is running out of the building, I'm going to be running in from an investor perspective. You have to be prepared to do that. You have to have the right amount of cash, and you have to be able to survive the market first and foremost.
So do you think there's a way to get on the right side of that pendulum, both from a business investment standpoint, but also just a mentality standpoint, right? Because sometimes I think people find themselves on the wrong side of that pendulum, where the market's really shitty and I'm thinking really negative and my business is falling apart, but other people have the mentality where they see the opportunity. So how do you bridge that?
I think that's honestly an individual thing. Like, you have to be willing to tap into other people, to get coached potentially, and to allow somebody to speak the truth into you. You'd be surprised how many people I talk to that are unwilling to hear the truth of opportunity. They just don't believe it's there for them. Like, they think, well, that's for the other person. That's for the other guy or gal or the superstar, right? And to me, that's one of the biggest fallacies. I mean, if you look at who achieves that, it's just the person who's willing to make the extra 10 phone calls or to create an experience, right?
So when you're looking to invest your time and energy into people, can you separate the people that have that mentality that will never be able to get out of it, and the people that you see the potential in that maybe do have that wrong mindset?
To me, I don't necessarily have to look for them. They usually end up coming to me, and it's usually because of their hunger, right? So sometimes in these mentor-mentee relationships, right away, just based upon the questions that somebody asks. I want to learn this. I want to be okay with being uncomfortable here. I want to dream and grow my business to $100 million, and they're doing $10 million right now. And so sometimes it's just the mindset that they show up with, the questions that they ask. Then the next step is, okay, the rubber meets the road if they're willing to put in the work in alignment with their goals. I was told by a golf coach, I have like a big golf nut and I always wanted to get better. And so I hired this guy, right, to teach me how to swing better and lower my handicap and go out and play and be frustrated with my score. And we were out playing in a golf tournament one day, and he just looks at me and he says, I'm really frustrated. And he can tell it's apparent. I'm like, not even frustrated, I'm like angry. And he goes, never let your efforts exceed your expectations. And I knew what he was talking about right away. That in that moment, that meant you're not on the range enough. You're not on the putting green enough. You're not in the bunker enough practicing. You have acquired and asked all these questions, and the knowledge is there, and you have the mechanics, but you have not ingrained them into your golf swing. So when you show up to a tournament and you play like shit, you ought not get frustrated because your efforts, don't let your efforts exceed your, or you don't let your expectations exceed your effort. And that's the same thing in business, right? I see people all the time who they do have that dream. They have the vision. It's really clear to them. But for whatever reason, they're just unwilling to execute the little things in the business plan day to day to day, the tactics, right, that will get them from point A to point B. That's the only difference.
Do you find that some people are working hard, but they're not working on the right things? Like the Peter Sheehan, we all saw him speak, and he said, he's talking about heart surgeons not doing everything, just doing the bit where they put the stent in the heart. And so quit working hard and do the hard work. Do you think that that's the case with a lot of people, where it's not that they're not working hard, they're putting in the hours, but they're spending it on the wrong things.
Yeah, I usually see it, and it's typically one of two things, but the most common is the inability to stay focused on the task at hand. So here's an example, right? You want to dig a well and you want to hit water. This is an analogy people use in business all the time. You got to dig straight down 100 feet to hit water. And the people that you see that work really hard that don't usually strike water is because they dig a 5-foot well, and then they think that's not working, so I'm going to use a different strategy, and they move 5 feet over, and then they dig another 5-foot well, and that doesn't work, and then they move over and they dig another 5-foot well. So usually when I see somebody working really hard but not achieving maybe the outcomes that they want, it's most typically because they don't realize that it takes a long, long time to hit it. Some of the folks in our industry, like you see some of these big producers, and what you think that they just arrived on the scene and somehow threw up $150 million in production, right? The reality is that's probably 7 to 8 to 9 years
of hard work,
of phone calls and hard work and doing the same thing over and over and over until it just slowly accumulates. It's like chopping wood for the wintertime.
Well, that's what was so beautiful about Hunter's last video.
Yeah.
Is a Hunter Mark Hugh?
Yeah, Mark Wirt.
Mark Wirt. He's coming on the podcast. He owes us an episode. He was supposed to come on a couple weeks ago, but here you have one of the top loan officers in the country. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And he's been every other week been doing a half an hour Skype call or whatever it is with our company. And the last one, he role-played prospecting calls on referral partners with somebody else that's in the same coaching program as him. And so here you have one of the top loan officers in the country practicing making prospecting calls. And I thought it was beautiful. I think it really drove home that point, right?
In front of the entire sales force, right?
Yeah.
So number one is he's completely willing to be vulnerable and allow his mistakes to be shown. But in an instant, there probably wasn't a salesperson on the phone call that didn't understand how much practice went into his ability to overcome objections and his ability to initiate the phone call. It was so smooth and so dialed, but he didn't just show up that way out of pure talent. And even Hunter would tell you that. That's 8 years of practicing his craft over and over and over simply because he wants to be the best at it.
I thought it was great. All right, we found the lyrics. So I got to make a Hatebreed fan. I wore my Hatebreed shirt today just because for this reason. But yeah, you can see here he's talking about the it lies dormant, so far from dead, grating on me this uninvited sense. The whispers like branches as they bend. Yeah. Right? Isn't that good? Floods of frustration cascading in my skull on the axis back and forth, the swinging pendulum. So much damage bashing each wall. I hear the sound panning as in the hourglass as it falls. It's freaking great.
That's a great verse right there.
Yeah, I wanted to see the part where he talked about
because he's defining a physical sensation with some pretty amazing words. I mean, have you ever been so frustrated or scared that you just start to feel your blood boil and start to feel that heartbeat in your temples? And
yeah.
like when I read that verse, that's what I think of. Like all these thoughts and emotions are welling up, and there's a lot of science.
Yeah, so read
it,
this one here. There it is again, telling you can't. The lump in your throat, you fight to swallow back. There it is again, hoping that you won't. So he's saying that voice is hoping that you won't shut it out. Wishing failure, but not giving up the ghost. Silent voices stabbing at peace, pushing off fingers from the ledge of sanity like 1,000 leeches, feeding on your wits, making something meaningless seem significant. I love it. I get so fired up, and it's super heavy metal. So Hatebreed, if you are into metal and you're looking for some positive metal, because I know it's hard to find sometimes. This Hatebreed's awesome. So Ryan loves it.
Let's see if we can just do like a quick 5-second. And that is how Cody relaxes. And that is how Cody relaxes in the office next to mine.
Perfect way to make phone calls in the afternoon.
So
juiced up.
My wife and I are going to Justin Timberlake. That's her jam, right? Is that type of music.
Chris Stapleton earlier this year, right?
Chris Stapleton,
that's good stuff there.
Counting Crows, like that's our speed when we listen to music or go to concerts together. I took her to Hatebreed and Guar a few weeks ago. And she hated Guar, but she loves Hatebreed. She'll put it on when she's working out, and she's in a leadership position now. But so much of their songs is about positivity and not being a defeatist and overcoming. And so shout out to Hatebreed, Jamie. Oh, you remember Headbangers Ball back in the day on MTV?
MTV.
Jamie Josta, the host. This is his band.
Oh my. I had no clue.
So
that's taking me way back now.
Yeah.
Dated myself. You dated me, Cody.
Yeah. Well, Jamie Josta, if he's listening, which I'm sure he is, he's going to have to come on next time he comes through Portland.
There you go.
Yeah.
Rock and roll version.
So, how did you get where you're at? You said you're a blue collar country boy. What part of Oregon did you grow up?
I grew up in, I was born in Coos Bay. Lived in a little town called Reedsport, which is a mill town in southern Oregon, and then about 30 miles south there, North Bend, Coos Bay area. So we moved back to Coos Bay when I was in the 5th grade, and went all the way through high school. Graduated North Bend High School.
And what was it like growing up in Coos Bay?
It was actually a really, really fun experience. I mean, pretty small town, but not so small that there wasn't shopping and stores and that kind of stuff. But right on the Oregon coast. So I spent a lot of time, riding and racing dirt bikes and 3-wheelers and 4-wheelers. And, in that part of the country, right, your parents, you get a pickup truck at 16 and you throw the dirt bike or the 3-wheeler in the back of the truck and you'd head out and go and there wasn't much worry. I mean, it's just kind of slow pace. And so, the town was really behind all sports and athletics and just a very small hometown feel.
Was there... among the people your age, was everyone trying to get out of Coos Bay, like when they graduated, or
it was a big shift actually by the time I got to end of high school because the spotted owl controversy came in, and so the logging industry, which is very, very robust, plus all of the plywood mills, saw mills, all the manufacturing components of milling timber, as well as the commercial fishing industry and being down in that part was really, really robust. Both of those were, declining at a rapid rate. So as I was younger, say my 8th grade, 9th grade, maybe sophomore year, most of those folks were really happy to stay home and, get a high paying job at one of the mills or working in the woods, commercial fishing. Maybe sometimes they'd commercial fish in Oregon and then take a trip to Alaska and use their skill set up there. And so the big shift happened when the mills started closing down, the jobs started going away. You saw more and more people start to head out, go off to college.
The mills are still open there, right? They're still operating, or are they closed?
There might be a handful of mills, but any of the major mills, like the big ones that were down there, Weyerhaeuser, International Paper, like those mills are all gone. They turned one of them into a casino.
Really?
Yeah, it's actually pretty cool looking.
So, high school football, baseball. I wrestled for a hot second, like from the time I was in kindergarten till about my sophomore year.
Is that where you learned to fast?
No. I was this like really skinny beanpole kid that probably should have never put on a set of pads. But wrestling was, I think, probably like my first love. And then I got into high school and I realized that after getting choked out a couple times, or what seemed like getting choked out, I was like, I should probably take up playing catcher in baseball for a while.
And then you went to college in Portland, is that right?
I went to school down in Monmouth, just outside of Salem, at Western Oregon.
Nice. So Monmouth, another small town.
Yeah.
I have some friends from Monmouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. They love this place.
It's
this
amazing.
Museum.
Yeah.
And then did you know you were going to have business be your major? Is that?
I did. And in fact, I declared business as my major and economics as my minor the second that I got there. I come from a business family, right? And even though it was a very blue-collar family, they still ran it like a business. I mean, all my uncles, all my cousins, my grandfather, my father, they all worked at one place, and it was the same.
Was that the mill? Or?
No. So they were in the floor installation business. So they did the carpet and Formica, linoleum, and so they did everything from sales to accounting to the taxes to all of it. And even though it's just our family, you still got to run it like the fundamentals of the business.
Did you think that maybe you'd go to college in business and economics and then go back?
No, because interestingly enough, I want to say it was my sophomore or junior year, my father exited the family business. And so I realized at that point I probably wouldn't go back. Even though I still have some cousins and a couple uncles that are in the industry, the family business has not been around since my grandfather passed.
So why the mortgage industry?
I sadly enough got hooked on economics. Sounds like a bad drug, and it probably is for most. But but got hooked on economics. Had a chance to do. There were several internships when I was at college, and could do a summer internship. So I did an internship at a finance company, and just fell in love with the modeling aspect of it. You know, applying economics, using finance, and then working with people. Like those things kind of seemed to mesh. Didn't really have an idea of what I was going to do, but the following year when I graduated, I went to work for another finance company. It was called Norwest at the time. Ended up getting acquired by Wells Fargo sometime later. But that's really where I learned how to get comfortable on the phone, like, you know, working with people and applying my math skills and economic skills.
So do you find that during that time you picked up a lot of skills that have carried you through your career?
Yeah, number one being, you know, we all spend a lot of time on the phone, right? How to develop rapport with people, how to create an experience for people, how to understand their needs, not just sell them something. Those places had amazing training programs. And so you would spend the first year in those places doing nothing but essentially being trained, and then slowly working you into, you know, massive amount of hours on the phone.
Do you think that still exists? Because, you know, you got me reading Good to Great, and Circuit Cities uses an example a lot in that book. And at one point in the book, they talk about how Circuit City was going to invest in their people, and that's where they were going to go. And so when I was going to college, I was selling computers at Circuit City, and they sent me away for a 4-day sales training. And recently, I've looked back at that. That was the single best sales training I've ever received. And so some of the stuff we're doing right now, I went back to some of those basics I learned. And those fundamentals have carried me through. And who would have known that some entry-level sales job selling computers at Circuit City would. So do you find that that a lot of companies are doing that now, or still doing that?
I think it's industry specific. I mean, for sure, if you look at, you know, pharma, biotech, banking, like traditional depository banking, I think when you start to move to industries where the sales force is predominantly entrepreneurial, meaning they drive their own book of business, and those people are almost all people who have to invest in themselves and find their own training, whether that's like a sales mastery type event, or, you know, a coaching program that helps them not only build systems to do the manufacturing, but also scripting in terms of how to identify what somebody needs, what they're looking for, and how to best make a recommendation on a product for them, especially with something as complex as what we do, like mortgages, right? Like understanding how to make sure that someone's in the right product, not spending too much money, but also not putting them in a position of risk.
So you're saying if someone's not providing that training for you, you should go out and actually invest in your own training?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of our industries, like if you're all, you know, kind of all in commission, then that's what we see. Like, right? You got to go figure out how to take care of not just you, but your clients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when I started out, First Horizon had a program. They sent us down to Dallas.
Yeah.
And I think you spent a week there going through class with all the other new people, and it was good.
I think the big shift really happened like post 2008. I just don't know that for a significant amount of time it was in the budget for many purely mortgage companies, right? That the training is a huge expense, and while it pays off, you also have to factor in the cost of turnover when you don't do that is super expensive. And so it seems to me there wasn't a lot of people to train either. So if you just kind of isolate our industry and look at it that way, there wasn't a lot of people that were super excited about coming into our business in, you know, 2009, 2010, 2011. So there's really nobody to train. And if you look at what the average age of sales people or originators are in our business right now, it's like 57 years old.
It's crazy.
So there hasn't been really any new young infusion. Most of them have gone the way of tech. I think they're going to get to the mortgage banking industry, honestly, now via tech, via fintech. And so they're going to come in, you know, starting out as a coder or programmer and having all sorts of training. They're going to have to make the jump and learn the nuances of mortgage banking. But I think we're going to see an infusion of youth via tech.
Good. All right. So a lot of your skills were learned early on through training and that kind of stuff. One of the biggest things I think we have to offer other people that are listening, or other people that are masterminding, or other businesses that are looking at us, is the adversity we faced during the Great Recession. And a few months ago, I got to listen to you talk a little bit about that. But, you know, if you are running a small business, or you're trying to make it in leadership role, and you're dealing with adversity, you know, make some correlations there for me.
All right, so repeat that one more time. I got to thinking about the crash in my head, and I was remembering a really haunting story. So so sorry. I had a moment of trauma.
What story were you?
I was just remembering that I want to say it was August of 2007, and Lehman Brothers had just pushed a bunch of loans back on the company, one of the companies that I owned and was running at the time. And I remember getting in the shower the next morning and just my body shaking, like literally just from nerves or anxiety, mad anxiety, whatever it was. But I just remember shaking in the shower and just trying to get the shower hotter and hotter and hotter so I could just stop, shaking from nerves, being sick to my stomach. And remember pulling up to my office and just knowing that all the employees are in there. They probably don't have access to a lot of this information yet, right? Like what's being pushed back to us, margin calls and all sorts of stuff like that. I just remember saying, okay, that was the moment where I really was telling you about, I got to learn how to get through. Maybe it's not 3 hours, maybe it's 1 hour. I got to find a way to get something to eat on my stomach, and I got to find a way to make it an hour. And I got to find a way how to get to lunch and then get through the end of the day.
Because a lot of people were dependent on you.
Correct.
At that time. What was your
and a lot of people were going out of business. People
Yeah.
much bigger than us, right? Bear Stearns was getting ready to collapse. Lehman Brothers was collapsing. So I'm looking around going, if a 152-year-old or 150-plus-year-old company can go down, what's my little tiny company going to be subjected to 3 months from now, 6 months from now?
So I was talking to somebody recently about the recession, and this website still exists. Pull it up. This will bring back some memories. Theimplodometer.com.
Oh yeah,
it still exists, and they still write articles. Have you looked at it recently?
I haven't.
I recall seeing that.
It still says 397.
We'd all come into work each day, and
The problem with that website, now looking back at it, at the time, it was kind of like a shameful thing to be on that list.
Employdometer.
Employdometer.
Yeah.
And the reality is, I can't tell you how many amazing leaders and gifted business owners just got shut out of their own businesses because there was no access to liquidity.
Yeah.
You could have been the best operator on the planet, and in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong counterparty, you're out of business in 24 hours. So,
We used to sit and watch it. See, we tallied 388 mortgage companies. So, and there's a big nuclear mushroom cloud right there.
Perpetuating our own fear.
We used to come in every day, and it would show who went out of business that day and who was on the watch list. And I worked for Central Pacific Mortgage at the time. And I remember when Central Pacific Mortgage popped up on the watch list. And I was like, oh, shit. And then the following week, they couldn't fund loans I'd already signed.
Right.
And then that's when it shut down.
Perfect example, right? Central Pacific, good company, good leadership, price sound financials, and just a victim of the industry.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I think, like I was saying, is that I think we have a lot of value to add to other people that are facing adversity in their businesses. And I think that some of the feedback we've got on this podcast is just listening to other people either talk about times where they almost went out of business or went through some major adversity, or everyone wants to hear people's success stories. And the really successful people we've had on says, well, nobody ever asked me about the time I failed, because there's more to be learned there than there is the times I've had success. So, I mean, I'm sure there are people now that are going through things in their business that are making them have insomnia and shake at night. So, talk about getting through that.
Yeah, look, again, you got to go back to being in the present moment. So you got to say, I've got some battles to fight today. And while you're doing that, you have to take some time each week to pull your eyes up off the table, right? And you got to say, okay, if I'm truly going to survive, not just survive, but thrive and be sustainable long term, I got to go find the opportunity. And for me, I had a coach for 16 years. His name's Greg Harkavy, and he was amazing at just helping me see there's opportunity everywhere. And one of the things that we would talk about is, and this relates to the NFL, and now I watch the NFL probably differently than I did back then. And it's this concept that, hey, if the industry is shut down and you can't, let's just take that over to the NFL side. If your offense can't score, sometimes you have to find a way to score on defense. And I felt like I spent most of late 2007 and early 2008, figuring out how to score from a defensive position. And it's not a lot of fun, but it can be really effective. And so, early 2000, I'll say it was 2007, So New Century, who was the REIT that owned American Home 123, they were a REIT that started to go down, and we were able to pick up 3 of their branches for almost no capital investment because we were buying the assets out of bankruptcy. So I woke up one day and we basically had nearly tripled the size of our company simply because we were alive, we were functioning, we had an understanding that we needed to grow, we wanted to grow. They were in the right market in terms of the products that were available, still had liquidity. And I don't know how many people are aware that you can still score on defense. Right? The market handed something to us. We could have chose to not grow, not spend any money, right?
Just too risky.
Too risky. Hold on to all of our cash and capital and let's not take any risk. In those moments of, deep fear and doubt and I don't know if the industry's going to be around, we had some things on our side, like we were really young. We were scared. We didn't know any better. But when the opportunity came, we figured out a way to score on defense. So I think to me, for folks that are out there right now, if you feel like you're playing a little bit of defense, it's okay. Pick your eyes up because there's always an interception, pick six, right? There's a fumble recovery for a touchdown. There's a lot of different ways to score in business. You don't always have to be on the attack being the ultimate aggressor.
Well, and look how many awesome companies came out of the Great Recession. It's almost like, when you have to burn a crop. It's kind of what it was like because Uber popped up, all these different companies, Tesla, a lot of the mortgage companies. Alpine started out of the recession, right?
Pinnacle,
yeah. So, I wonder if those companies would have popped out if it wasn't for the recession.
I can honestly tell you without a doubt, there's no way. They would have never grown at that rate because the market would have been thriving and people wouldn't have left. And you wouldn't have been able to acquire people for pennies on the dollar, right? The greatest gift that market gave to the post-collapse mortgage companies was that they had an opportunity for people to join them without them really having to buy these companies at a premium. They just simply all started consolidating to the remaining companies that survived and had capital. And so it was an amazing time to build a company because not only were you having a tremendous amount of volume and highly talented executive teams and highly talented sales teams joining your firm, they were doing it willingly and wantingly, and they were enjoying the culture that came with this connectedness. Like you feel safe when you join other people with similar problems.
Yeah. And
now you start working to figure out the solution. And that to me was maybe the funnest part of like late 2008, 2009. We got out of being so defensive, we're trying to survive each day, to how do we solve liquidity problems? How do we find new product? How do we grow the sales force? How do we deploy technology, which we had never even thought about up until that point?
Well, and it seems like a lot of people, I'm sure there's loan officers that got out of the industry. They're like, well, I got to go hustle and find something else. And so I think a lot of those entrepreneurs came out too because of their company shutting down or them losing their jobs.
I got a question. Where did the core values come from back from your Alpine days? Was that something that you had thought of? Was that something that a group of you had thought of? Because one of my first memories in 2009, when I first met you, you came out to one of our branches and not a person at the table. Yeah, not a person at the table knew teamwork, empowerment, positivity, and excellence. Yeah. And I know that now to this day because you called everybody out at that meeting.
Yeah. So I still have the poster in my home office.
Where did that come from?
So the original 5 co-founders of Alpine, again, this just goes back to the credit of being coaching. I mean, I hope we get a chance to talk about the power of coaching, right? And being that young, to have somebody hold your hand who's been there before and teach you how critical, vision is to the success of a company, how critical having a business plan is, and how critical having culture or mission, right? Those are the things that really drive organizations to be great. And we basically went through a coaching lesson. We got on we rented a big bus, and we took a trip to Bandon Dunes. And we just basically locked ourselves in a bus. We allowed ourselves to play golf one day, but for 4 days, all we did is say, okay, if this is not aspirational, meaning this is not who we hope to be someday, this is who we are right now. As a collective, what are we? And what would we want our teammates to be? And that's how we came up with teamwork, empowerment, positivity, and excellence. And I remember us having these really long conversations about, well, why not integrity? Well, if you're already doing things with excellence, you should just assume that you guys are going to show up and that there's going to be integrity. There's going to be wholeness to whatever you're trying to do, right? So there were some things that made the short list. It's funny how that stuff all comes together. But at the end of the day, I remember the icing on the cake was when we put excellence down. And excellence is a really weird thing, right? Because one person's definition of it is different than the next person's definition of it. And then people's willingness or unwillingness at times to call other people out. Like, what is excellent about this behavior? I remember us in, leadership meetings when somebody say, well, let's do this. And the core values in the culture at that time were so strong that we could literally just look at one another and say, what's positive about that? What's empowering about that? You're taking power away from the people. You're taking their decision-making ability away. Like, prove to me what's empowering about that. And we truly lived, for a fairly long period of time, only making decisions within the realm of those. Like, if they didn't meet those core values, a decision would not get passed by our team. And it was, if you worked there, you felt it. It was a living, breathing, alive thing, and people worked by them. So that was probably one of my fondest experiences. So thanks for asking that question. Cool. That bus ride has stuck with me ever since.
So it sounds like there might have been, well, you brought this up the other day, that when you're having those kind of conversations as a team, that you almost want to encourage discourse a little bit.
The entire notion of what's known as dynamic tension, right? If you're pulling on a rope and I'm pulling on a rope, it gets taut and we kind of balance each other out. Or conflict, like easier said as conflict. Right? If I'm not allowed and you don't trust me enough for me to call you out on, well, what's good about that idea, and can we wrestle with it? And I don't know that should make it as a core value finalist, right? I don't know that that's who we are right now. Without that conflict, it's really, really hard to arrive at the truth. The problem with conflict is that most leaders or senior management teams want to have an argument, and there's not trust built yet. So if there's not, and that just comes straight out of Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I'm totally ripping that off, by the way, but it's such an amazing book for teams, because if you don't, like, if I haven't worked with you and got to know you as a person and know how you tick, and you don't trust me implicitly, how do I ever create conflict with you? You'll either shut down, or you'll get angry or emotional, or I will. And now we're in a heated debate and an argument, and one of us is trying to win. And that's not the purpose of conflict in my book. Like, we're trying to create tension to get rid of all of the surface crap and get down to what we really are and make a solid decision.
So as a leader, how did you get good at that? How did you get good at pushing somebody to where they either had to choose to start an argument and then, or submit?
So the way that we did it is you take a model like 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, right? And you don't even really know at that point what he means by conflict. You don't really know what you're trying to arrive at. And if the group is really willing to work together on something, like they know this will lead us down a path of success and growing our people and growing, their careers. If we study this and we do it, we'll be okay. So there's all sorts of exercises in these books that you go through first to kind of lay the foundation. You don't just walk in the room and say, hey guys, let's have a bunch of conflict today, particularly with a group that you don't know. So the other thing too that's really important is, like, this was a group that I had been working with. Like, Ed Coker I had been working with since 1995. So we're writing some of this stuff in 2003, 2004. He and I had already worked together closely for 8 years. And same largely with the rest of the group of people. So these aren't things that you rush into. These are things where you have to spend a lot of time around a table with your team, understanding one another, building trust with one another, building each other up at times. Like, the affirmation component is just as critical as having some conflict, right? People have to understand that they know the value that you bring. And so you have to find those pivotal moments where you can affirm them in their skills.
So were there times with people that you've worked with for a long period of time like that where maybe you felt like you were getting to a point where the conflict, you weren't going to be able to overcome any conflict or a specific conflict? Did you ever get to that point with people?
Yeah, and people exited. Yeah. We bought their shares back. If we couldn't get into alignment about either, look, this is our vision, this is what everybody agreed to, we all wrote it together. If we're not in alignment with vision, then something's going to break. because this is the vision. This is where we're marching to. This is not going to change. And yeah, sometimes those, partnerships are just like marriage. They don't always stand the test of time. Sometimes people got to go.
So when we've been talking about vision a lot on our calls lately, and I went back, like I said, to the Circuit City days, and I went into their management program, getting excellent training. And I love doing this when I manage some of the stores, and I don't know why I let it go, but very similar where if they would move me from a top performing store to the worst performing store in the district. So I started off in Olympia, and then they moved me to Salem, which was horrible. And this is right when Best Buy entered the market. And but anyways, so I had to go into these people that didn't want to sell warranties, that would show up late, call in sick. And the exercise they taught me to do with these people is to sit down and go, okay, what is everyone's expectations for each other, right? And then without having to say it, other people will go, well, I want my coworkers to show up on time. Great, so we'd write it down on the whiteboard. I want them to be nice to clients or nice to customers. Okay, write that on board. I want them to help me out. And so they would start calling each other out, right? Because they would almost look at the person that's late every day and say, I want everyone to show up on time. So we'd get like 10 items, and then I'd turn it to me and say, okay, from a manager, what do you expect from your manager? And they would say things like, hold people accountable, right? If someone's late, discipline them. Bring lunch in once a month or whatever. So we'd write it down, then we'd have everyone sign it. And so that just like what you said, we agreed to, it wasn't core values, but it was agreed to a set of expectations. Then it was really easy to hold people, and when I would have to let somebody go, I would just show them that list, and they'd be like, I resign. I get it. It's not you, it's me.
Self-selection.
So, and that was like basic retail management training.
So after a team develops for a period of time, there's like 4 stages of team building. After a team builds for a period of time and that trust is there and the team is really looking to be cohesive and grow. One of the exercises that's out there, it's one of my favorites, called the TEE exercise. And essentially what you're saying is what happens. Like you go around the table and one of us would be selective and everybody else around the table would say, what is the one greatest thing that Ryan brings to the table as a team member? And conversely, what is the biggest downer that Ryan brings to the team? And the person who is getting the critique, both positive and negative, could only ask qualifying questions. Couldn't combat it, couldn't argue it, couldn't do anything. And you submitted yourself to this as a team member before you went to this offsite event, right? Wow. So you knew that, man, somebody in a lot of these, if you really trust somebody, right? If you know somebody really well for a long period of time, there's going to be probably some pretty raw honesty there, because you're there saying, I want to grow, I want to stretch, and that means I'm going to have to hear the things I don't necessarily even like about myself, and how I'm distracting the team or what I'm taking away from the team. But you also get that moment where you're like, okay, I bring some really good things to the team too. And when you walk away from that, it's interesting to watch the people who really want to improve their game. You see them in those areas where people have pointed out. You see them work really hard to improve. It is a wonderful thing to watch.
That's awesome.
I'll attribute that to something like Jocko's, slogan of "Own It."
Yeah.
Just absolutely, like, for better or worse, like whatever the situation is owning it and moving on from there.
Well, because people's defense mechanism, like if your wife says you never pick up after yourself, the first thing you say is, yes, I do. Right? Your first thing is to argue with them, right?
Or you go pick something up and you say, see, I just picked something up right now.
Yeah, well, you don't pick up your side of the bed, right? Yeah. So, that's got to take to be at that table, you have to have some sense of maturity and some sense of emotional intelligence, right?
Yeah, for sure. And also, you usually don't make it to that table. Like whether you're in some stage of management, you want to try to get to senior leadership, you probably don't make it there unless you have those attributes of truly wanting to get better. Meaning that you got to be a little bit introspective and saying, I'm willing to hear the not so good because I want to go next level. And people, if they don't really want that, they usually don't make it to that room.
And that's got to correlate to a lot of managers, a lot of producers that become managers. They got to reach a point where they're like, I don't want to do it. This wasn't meant for me, right? Like, I could make more money if I just produce without having all this extra stress. So there's got to be a point where that kind of happens, right?
There's definitely some selection there. I think a lot of times what happens, is particularly in our industry, is you take the most gifted salesperson and you jam them into a management job, and they're not really equipped to be a great manager. I mean, they're a great salesperson. So we give them all these charts and tools and reports and graphics, and there's a big difference in the definition of a leader versus a manager. Mm-hmm. And so now you've taken somebody who's probably very gifted at creating a great consumer experience. They're probably great at building relationships and rapport and identifying needs from a consumer standpoint. And they now get lopped all these policies and procedures and reports and things to manage to. And for whatever reason, they don't always make the connection to, if I just take this same notion of I need to build an experience for Ryan and Cody, and I have to build rapport, and I got to find out what their needs are, and I got to find a way to craft this to their needs, they get stuck in report land, and they get stuck in metrics, and they forget the things that they're really good at, and it dilutes some of their natural abilities. That's probably what I see most often. I wish we would stop doing that.
So how do you redirect them?
Well, look, some of it's through mentoring, right? Some of these folks, they really want to make the change to, like, I want to not only be able to manage to metrics and run the branch the way it's supposed to be run, but more importantly, I want to lead these people and help them improve their lives, grow their business, help the staff people, like whatever, it becomes a joint goal setting type deal, and they start to make the correlation to, if I just take my mindset that I have when I'm with my consumers, my clients, my referral partners, and switch that to the people that are on my team, they make the connection really fast. It's when they don't, and they get lost in no man's land, and they don't seek coaching, they don't seek a mentor, they don't seek something that will help them bridge that gap.
And then they start to get the opposite result. They start to push away the people they're there to support.
The salespeople get pushed away, and not only that, but their personal production goes down. So now they're really stuck in no man's land, and they're in a place where they're just miserable.
So good transition into coaching, right? Before we dive into coaching, tell us what about success is important to Patrick Palmer. That's the only question we try to ask on every episode. We don't always get to it, but
yeah. So what's important?
Or how has success, like the definition of success, changed over the course of, your career?
Yeah. So very, very early, again, kind of going back to my blue collar days, like success was all about monetary, right? That was the ultimate measuring stick. And I know we've talked about that in the past. Like that was the thing that I gauged by.
Put a Ferrari on your wall.
So just any of those things, right? And not always holistically material goods, but just what's the bogey of income that I made this year? And that means that I must have worked hard. I didn't really factor in, well, I got some help from the market or interest rates, or, the company did well, for, maybe the product expanded. So for me, that was the gauge for a while. And then I would say somewhere around 2009, 2010, when I started leading much bigger groups of people and started leading much bigger geographies, and you start learning about various people from various backgrounds and what their wants are, and you start to pour into that. Success became more about how many people can I help get to their end goal, and it became less about me and more about them. And to this day, that's still really my definition of success, because there are times outside of feeding my family and taking care of basic needs, I don't know that there's anything greater for me than to watch somebody light up when they learn something new and they're able to go from maybe they were that person at the front desk or a processor to being an underwriter to being an ops person to being a national credit person. Like to see that transformation, and that takes a lot of time. So you have to be patient in watching it. But to help them identify their goals and get there, to me, there's probably not a better measurement of success than to look back and say, these are all people's lives that we were able to affect and help them achieve their goals by simply putting ourselves aside.
So with that said, coaching, being open to mentorship, having a high level of emotional intelligence, all those things kind of seem congruent, right? So I remember walking into Ryan's office because I called you about something, and you said, sorry, I just got off the phone with my coach. I said, oh, you do coaching? You're like, yeah, I've had the same coach for like 18 years. And I found that, I didn't know that. I was like, that is so cool, because I'm I've been doing coaching for a few years now. And to know that my boss has a coach made me feel really good. So talk about coaching.
I mean, point out somebody in our industry that does really, really well that hasn't had some influence from a coaching program or system or process, or invests highly in self-improvement, whether that's, conferences or sales conferences or materials. Like you almost don't see it. And look, I mean, I learned this when I very, very first got in the business as an originator, and it was like, I'm a big sports nut, right? Mm-hmm. So, does Michael Jordan have a coach?
All of them do.
Does Tiger Woods have a coach? Tiger Woods had about 4 coaches. And he's always trying to find the ideal coach for where he's at in his career and his swing, right? From golfers to anybody you see, you need that second set of eyes. Coaching to me is less about someone telling me what to do it better. It's someone who has a different set of eyes and a different perspective on my business, and they can give me feedback that's like, hey, have you thought about this? Or hey, the connections that you make in coaching are unreal. I'm coaching the CEO at another company, and he operates from a place of abundance. And if you have this question, let's just reach out to him and ask it. So, it's kind of 2 parts, but for me, it was simple. And the only thing that wasn't simple that I'll admit to that I still see today is that I had a hard time paying for it. Back in those days, it was just like, I just got to write a check out of my pocket. And that initial getting used to investing in myself was a foreign concept. Like I'd, been to school and had that debt, obviously. But to me, it was that, man, I'm just new in the industry. I'm barely making money. Now, how am I going to afford this? Fortunately, I had a mentor at the time who was very, very successful. And he's like, if you don't afford it now, you won't get to that point. So find a way to make it happen. Mm-hmm. And I did.
And for those people listening that don't do coaching or haven't invested in coaching, it's not an expensive endeavor. When I first started, I was at the entry level position, and we're talking thousands and thousands of dollars. So it's a pretty big thing to go home and tell your wife, hey, just so you know, I spent $8,000 today on a coach for my business. Then have to make it their buy-in, and luckily, I have a spouse that trusts me, but.
Here's my suspicion about that, though, and this is all hindsight, and I'm fortunate to have many years of hindsight as it relates to coaching, and it's one of the reasons why I never stopped. Right? I mean, it would have been easy to say, okay, I've acquired X amount of knowledge or whatever, and I'll be done now with that investment, and I think the reason why you see a lot of people not choose to invest in themselves in coaching is because they deep down inside don't want to be held accountable to the work. The work that comes with it, the submission of this is my business plan, these are the things I promise to do, these are the priorities in my life. Whether it's fear of failing in one of those categories or not achieving it, or just pure fear of I just don't want to do it. My guess is that's probably why many people don't want to do coaching. And I would say, look, if that's in the back of your mind, if you just push that away and say, I'm going to step out on a limb and I'm going to get a coach because I want to get better. These are my goals, and I know I can't achieve them if I don't, maybe have a different perspective or somebody driving me to get there, and then just show up and do the work. And the ROI, in my experience, will never, ever be a factor. Mm-hmm. I'm sure the same as you, right? You start Absolutely. Coaching, you see your volume double and triple. All of a sudden, that conversation you had with your wife or significant other or partner, it's like, oh, we just tripled their income. I guess we're not really worried about
$8,000
the coaching fee.
Yeah,
right.
Your hopefully your income increases, but also the way you do business changes. And for me, it's you get more satisfaction out of the way you're doing business.
I mean, almost always. The other thing that comes with coaching is just you're going to be surrounded, either in mastermind events or coaching events, or rather sales mastery. You're going to be surrounded by people who are like. Going back to, who am I surrounding myself with if I want to achieve these things? You got to surround yourself with other people who want to achieve those things, or people who have been there before.
So if someone's listening, they're like, I think I'm going to get a coach, either in our industry or outside of their industry. What is kind of your advice for vetting out your coaching and figuring out what you want to get out of coaching? Because you said to me once that there's 2 dramatically different types of coaches. So right now, in the way my business is going, I like the coaching that comes from a point of consulting, right? Where they may say, okay, here's all your ideas. I think you should hold on to these for a while. Just focus on these. My old coach used to use the word pivot all the time. If we had a great implementable idea, he would say, okay, this is going to be a pivot point, and he would kind of help consult me through. But then you have the coaches that are more on an emotional level, maybe helping with the work-life balance, maybe more on leadership and less on the nuts and bolts. So what's your advice?
Yeah, look, it's really important to understand what you want out of your career and what you want from a coach. So understand that first before you even go into it, and then make sure that you interview multiple coaches and tell them exactly what you're looking for, what your expectation is, and if they can even meet it. But I think there's two schools, right? You have one group, and I don't, it's not really just two, there's probably multiples, but they fit in here somewhere. And one is, I do really, really well at work-life balance. I can get out and I can work out. I go to the gym and I eat well, and I, you know, my relationships are sound, and I'm pouring time into each of these, you know, quote unquote accounts. But I'm probably okay with leaving the office at 3 o'clock, and I'm probably okay with getting there at 8:30, and I'm probably okay if I don't make 40 phone calls if I make 20, and I'm probably okay if I don't write a business plan. And so those people tend to gravitate towards very system-oriented, process-oriented, you know, coaching. You got to make this many calls. And if you don't, when you get on the coaching call, you don't make that call. And if you're honest about it, here's the other thing about coaching. If you're not going to be honest with yourself or your coach, don't waste your money.
Totally.
This is all about being honest. Like if you're going to write down and pay for a coach and cheat on how many calls you make, or your business plan, or your life plan component, you are just throwing money out the window. Don't ever do that. The second component are what I would call the people who are so driven in their career and so focused on their career goals that it consumes the other part of their lives, and it becomes really unhealthy. So that's, look, I'm going to be up at 4 in the morning, and I'm leaving, and I'm going to travel every single week, and I'm not going to take a break, and I'm going to get to the point where my body actually starts to deteriorate because I'm not eating well, I'm not working out, I'm probably overweight, high blood pressure. I don't see my kids. And when I do, when I'm at home, I'm not very present. And unfortunately for me, for a lot of years, even with a coach, this is where the part of, I'm just like lecturing myself about the honesty part. I would not be present at home, not be present with my children, be on my phone. So it's like I'm there and I'm with my children, and I think, oh, I'm at home and I'm being really balanced. But the reality is I have an iPhone in my hand, right? So striking those balance, whatever camp you're in, understand what you want. There's ample time and energy for all the things that you love and you're passionate about life, but also the things that you want to do in work. Just know where your deficiencies are.
All right, so let's say you're a leader and you're leading a company, maybe a small business, maybe you have 100 employees and it's sales staff, and you're listening and you're like, you know what, my sales staff really, really needs coaching. I'm going to invest in some coaching for them. What advice do you have to that person? Do you force your salespeople to go buy their own coaching, or do you think that they must have skin in the game is important, or what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I don't really believe the pay for somebody else to be coach methodology works. At least it hasn't for me. That's an investment in time and money, and only the people who want to execute and go next level, and really have striving for peak performance, they're not going to get the ROI for you. So they have to determine: do I want to be excellent? Do I want to be great? Then I'll fuel my own success. And maybe we help them when they show it, right? Maybe there's some way that you help them economically, or you free up some time for them, or you get them a flight or whatever. Like I'm all for, the partnership component of it.
Well, that's what Strode did for me. I mean, I refused to go to sales mastery for years. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, I don't believe in the rah, like just give me a phone and let me make some calls and just stay out of my way. And then I got cornered one year, and he's like, look, I'll buy your hotel and your airfare. I just want you to go.
Yeah.
And I never asked for my coaching to be covered from that point on, because I went and he opened my eyes to something that I would have never done on my own. So maybe an investment to your staff to that level, or get them interested, buy them a book. Right?
I honestly, the one-off deals is completely different, right? Because you do have to have some base requirement for sales training and to help people maybe open their eyes, like you said. I mean, obviously Strode's one of the best in the world at that, and he's really connected with his people, and I have a lot of respect for him in that regard. And so the thing that I'm saying is just signing up for a full-blown coaching plan where somebody's going to build a business plan, have to execute, and show up and be in connection. That's not something you can make someone want to do. Mm-hmm. They have to want that for themselves, and they have to be willing to invest. Now, once they prove it, what we do down there is I pretty much manage that on an individual case-by-case basis. But I mean, I don't know of a time when we haven't invested in our people to some degree. It's less about the economic component and more about desire. Like for me, I'm willing to pour into somebody as much as they want, as long as they can match the intensity. Like don't show up late and slack off, and then ask me for a coach because you think it's going to make you better, but you're not going to do any of the work. Like that sounds really rough, But that's the reality. No, show up and, get after it, and then there's going to be some rewards to that, economic or otherwise.
Yeah.
And I think with that being said, as soon as somebody does go through the coaching and achieve that, they're not necessarily going to want probably that kickback, because they're going to see the rewards of their hard work.
It absolutely fuels them. Yeah, they stop wanting that.
Well, and I had a coaching change last year, and got introduced to a new coach, and really, really nice coach. Very good at maybe the second type of coach you described, of helping people with the work-life balance, and more of an emotional coach. And I think I had to make a change because I wasn't getting what I wanted out of the coaching. So through the same company, I switched to a different coach. If my company was paying for the coaching, I don't know that I would have done that.
Yeah, of course not.
I probably would have just said, I'm
Stuck
just
it out.
meeting
Write
an
it out.
obligation. I'm just write it out with this guy. But I was like, all right, I'm the one paying it, so I might as well get what I want out of it, right? Might as well get my money's worth. So
It's like blue collar 101 though, right? I mean, if you grow up blue collar, like one of the first things you learn, and mostly because the money just isn't there, right? But the first thing you learn is, you want a car? You better find a job, start working and saving. And when you get that car, the value that car has to you, how you take care of it, how you wash it, how you service it, is completely different than if something's given to you.
Huge, yep.
I mean, you think about that from a parenting regard, like how we teach our children to go out and earn something. Like, to me, that is the ultimate analogy for what you're talking about in terms of investing in coaching. Anything that's hard fought and earned, they're going to cherish it and respect it so much more.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a good place to leave people. I really appreciate the time and energy you invested in Ryan and I, and a lot of the leadership stuff. I mean, it's been eye-opening. And this is, I've done coaching for a few years. I've been around some great leaders, but the time and effort you're not just to Ryan and I, but the blog you write and how open you're being. I think when you said your definition of success is seeing other people grow, I don't think that's horseshit.
That's straight from the heart, man. I'm telling you right now.
Ryan, do you have anything to ask your boss on air before we turn off?
No, I think we're solid. It was good hearing some ideas come out today.
What do you think about what we're doing? What do you think about this? One time you said to me, you go, success must be important. You have a podcast about success, right?
Look, I think this is, you guys are tapping into the future of communication and connection. I mean, I think I mentioned that in one of my blogs. People are hungry to have content that maybe in the beginning stages of their career, they can't necessarily afford a coach. It's great to tell somebody to go out and invest in yourself and afford a coach, but if the means aren't there, you have to find other ways of content. And I think what's amazing about technology right now is that you have people that are willing to create content and put it out there for consumption, and people can make leaps and bounds if they just go out and search it and find it and tap into it. So for me, I love what you guys are doing, because over time, as you perfect this craft as well as some of the other areas in your life, this grows and gets velocity, and then people learn from it, and then they get better, and then maybe they spin off some idea. And you don't really know till maybe 20 years from now just how much impact you're having on people's lives by doing something like this, but you are. That I can assure you. So look, keep going, guys. I've had an awesome time. Thanks for the invite.
Well, thanks for saying that. It means a lot. You're starting to hear where people used to say, "Oh, you got to read this book." You're starting to hear business people saying, "Oh, you got to listen to this podcast."
Yeah.
Not our podcast. Well, I'm sure our podcast, but people are starting to use that in their dialogue. And the second thing I want to say is it's given us a shortcut or a direct line to sit down with people like Pat Stone and people that but you've worked really hard to get those relationships. Well, without a podcast, there's no way I'd be able to say, "Hey, Pat Stone, let's talk about your success and let's talk about Vietnam."
Can I have 2 hours of your time?
Yeah, I can have 2 hours of your time to bullshit and pick your brain. So the podcast has really given us that platform to where I think Ryan and I have grown a lot in the last 18 months because of this podcast, and I'm hoping that other people feel the same about listening to it. So, all right. Peace out, everybody. We will see you guys next time. I'm on my way out of the country soon, so we'll be. I'm going to try to host a podcast in South America. I'm going on a fishing trip with 9 super successful businessmen, and we're going to be without power and internet for 10 days. And I'm going to bring a little microphone and hopefully get a little podcast going on the side of Jurassic Lake. So until then. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yep. All right. Take care.
See ya.